Hello again, everybody. This is Mr. Everything. I'm coming back at you with another Wargaming miniature video. In this video, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be painting some skeletons. I'm going to show you a quick and easy way to paint some skeletons. But first of all, I just want to kind of show you the different skeletons that I have. I've got some Warhammer Quest, remember that game? Warhammer Quest skeletons. I've got some old I think these are Grenadier skeletons. I've got some Warhammer Fantasy Citadel skeletons. I've got Grenadier Dwarf skeletons. I also have the old Grenadier plastic D&D skeletons. These skeletons came from the D&D set. And I've got a few other types of skeletons mixed in here. I'm not exactly sure what. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm just going to show you a really quick and easy way to paint skeletons and make them look good. First of all, I primed them all black. I know you're like, Mr. Everything, why'd you prime them black? Well, I always prime black, and you can kind of see how the black is underneath, how the black kind of shines through. And then what I did was, once the black dried, I went and primed them with an old, I mean this is old, 20 years old, Citadel bleached bone. It comes out this color. This is bleached bone. Now bleached bone is basically just a dark sand color. You can use model color dark sand and paint that over the entire thing. It is not, if you noticed, it's not ivory white. It's kind of a yellowish, brownish tan. So dark sand, if you don't have any bleached bone, perfect. Primed it. Now I didn't prime it heavy, I primed it light so that some of the darkness would still shine through. I wanted that. Okay. Now the next step is, and this is super easy. I mean, you can almost go with these right here and just let these play, but you have things on the models like I'm going to do these two. These are the two that I'm going to work with now. I'm not going to do these until later. You might see these at the end when I do the money shots. But just to show you how easy it is to paint a skeleton model, I'm just going to do these two real quick. Okay, so these are both just skeletons with a sword in their hand. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go ahead and really quickly use mithril silver on the swords. Should take 2 seconds. As you know, I normally put metallics on last, especially the ones that are supposed to be really dominant, like armor and swords, things like that, gun barrels. I do that last so that the model pops, so that the metallic is really super shiny. But with the skeletons, you want to paint the entire model first before the final step. So, and plus this is the only thing that's getting painted. And you can just slap it on there, actually, to be honest. You don't have to be super careful or anything, because the next step's going to disguise everything. Okay, so the skeletons have their metal painted. I got to let that dry before I go on to the next step. So I'm going to come back in about, and it'll be pretty close to the last step. Okay, so we'll be back in about 15 minutes, and we'll get the next step going. Okay, and the next step is we're going to apply a dip. Now, I use Polyshade. It has a stain and a polyurethane in one step. Now I'm going to be using the Pecan. Let me go ahead and shake this up, because you want a thorough mixture of your polyurethane and your stain. Now remember, this is an oil-based application, so you will need a thinner or a mineral spirits or some kind of turpentine or something like that to clean your brush when you are done. And you can see it doesn't want to open. You got a little can opening tool here. All right, we got this thing open, and I'm going to use a brush that has long been since worn out. This brush is so old because this polyurethane has a tendency to ruin brushes. Also, there are people that will take their model, they'll hold it by their base or what have you, and they will just dunk it completely in, and then that's why they call it dipping. But I feel that that's a little excessive, in my opinion. So what I use is I dip it in, I use a brush. Now what this stain will do, it'll settle down over time. It will settle down into all the cracks and crevices and rib cages and bones and eye sockets and everything in the model. And it will also darken the model and make it look aged. If you want to use black, you can use black. Be careful, because it'll darken the entire model up considerably, making it look black. So be careful on that. And that's why I don't use the like walnuts. That wood color is just a little bit too dark, and it'll make the model look, in my opinion, too dark. Now I go through and I kind of use the brush and kind of take off any of the excess. That's why I don't dip it. See how much there is on his back? Because when you dip it, you just get nothing but a big glob. There's companies out there like Army Painter that make a version of this specifically for modeling, but I find that it's no different than the Polyshade. Now I'm going to do this model as well. I'm going to do a handful of models actually. The ones that don't have any color to them, because I want to paint like robes and capes and shields and stuff like that before I dip them, because the dip will make them look old, dingy, dirty. It'll also enhance the colors. It'll really make all the cracks and crevices pop out, but it'll also make the bright colors like the reds and the blues dirty, and I want that. So I don't want to Polyshade before I paint the reds and the blues, because then I'll have lost that effect. So let me go ahead and Polyshade the ones that I'm going to paint. I'm going to let these Polyshades dry, and then we'll go to, and that usually takes a long time, like 12 hours or something like that. So later tonight, maybe even tomorrow, we'll go into the next steps. All right, I'll see you then. All right, we are back. Now, you can see that these models are kind of shiny. The polyurethane actually does put a shine on the models, but you can also see how the brown settles down inside of all the cracks and inside all the rib cages and the eye sockets and stuff like that. So that's what the Polyshade does for you. And I'm also, what I did was I took some model railroad ballast, and I used Elmer's glue and glued them down to the bases, and then I painted the bases as well as kind of dry brushed over the ballast with a boulder color. I don't know if you can see that, if it's in focus. Yeah, with Full Cart Boulder, and that got me this color here, which I wanted it to be a little bit of a contrast from the skeletons, because I wanted the skeletons to kind of stand out from the terrain. But I didn't want it to be green and grassy. I didn't want that. I wanted it to be like they're coming out of the rubble or they're coming out of the ruins or something like that. So I used rocks and boulder. All right, now you can kind of see over here like some of the other figures that I've done, and you can see the Polyshade didn't really detract from the colors, but it does put a protective coating on top of the model, and then once you go to dull coat it, it'll still be protected. It just won't be shiny. And that is actually my next step. I'm going to go outside. I'm going to take these models outside, and I'm going to dull coat them. Then I'm going to bring them back in, and we'll do some close-ups. All right. Give me a few minutes. I'll be right back. All right, guys, and we are back. Now, these are, what do you call it? I used the Krylon flat coat on these guys. And then I also used a little bit of water to wash any residue off. So they might still be a little bit wet, but primarily these guys are finished. Now, I want to kind of preface this final shot to let you know that a lot of these models are old. And when I say old, I mean old. Some of these models are from the 70s. Okay, so now like this model, this model, this model, and this model are from at least the late 70s. And then there's a few models in here that are from the 80s, like this model, this model, this model, that model. Those guys are plastic from the 80s. I use these guys from the 90s. Also, these guys are skeletons from the 90s. Pretty much everything here is from the 90s or earlier. I don't think anything here is... So every one of these models is over 20 years old, I would have to guess. And from various different manufacturers. But you can see that they look great. I mean, even the old models, the ones that have lost its rib cage, I mean, the detailing on the rib cage disappeared. The detailing on the jaw, the teeth and all that from the pewter that it was being used over time has just lost its shape. These models here, they've retained, their plastic models pretty much have retained their features, but even so, that still looks pretty darn good with the paint that I used and the dip and the everything. So I hope this helped you out on maybe restoring some of your old skeletons, or if you were afraid to start getting into painting skeletons. I love skeletons for D&D, for Warhammer, for all kinds of fantasy applications. Skeletons are one of my favorite monsters. They're not too deadly, but they are kind of threatening, and they just look cool. So that's my opinion. I'm going to adjust the focus a little bit so the back guys are in focus as well. So I'm going to kind of cycle through the front and back focus so you can see some of the back guys in focus as well as some of the front guys. Hey, thanks for coming out and checking out this video. I appreciate you guys. If you guys got any comments, please put them in the comments below. If you have a different way of painting skeletons, or if you've got any additional techniques, please post them in the comments below. And if you want me to paint any other kind of monsters or anything like that, just let me know. Or any other kind of figures, just put it in the comments. I read all the comments. And I really love you guys. I'll catch you next time.